What's up, sketchers? I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much for 25 subscribers. It's not a lot for many people, but it's quite a lot for me. And as a celebration, I'm going to show you the process of my latest drawing, Illusion of a Better Life, which I'll explain to you in details later on the video, so definitely keep on watching if you really want to find out the meaning behind this. But let's start by explaining what's going on. I think to really explain the drawing, we need to actually look at my logo, my new logo, which is now called Spectrum Sketch rather than Benny Sketch. Now, the reason for the change is basically because the spectrum part is actually in reference to my autism. I mean, you might have already guessed that maybe, but I feel like it's just a nice little touch, a nice little fact about me that not many people might even know. And also as well, this drawing itself is actually also referencing autism, not necessarily my autism no, but just autism in general. Now, the reason why it's called The Illusion of a Better Life is because of the use of trees. Now, I already drew a pine tree, but you might have already seen I actually rubbed out the pine tree. And the reason for this is because actually acacia trees don't really grow in groups. Now, because autistic people are sometimes isolated, they don't relate to people, I thought acacia trees was a sort of good metaphor for this because they don't really grow in big groups, they're very wide out. But there's never only one acacia tree, there are still many of them out there. Whereas pine trees grow in large groups and there's generally loads of them, and that can represent the majority, neurotypicals. Whilst that does make autistic people special in some sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are better than neurotypicals at all, but then also vice versa. We're not less just because we have a condition that makes us very weird to some, it just makes us different. And that's the whole point of the drawing. Despite the trees being trees, they are very different, but they're still trees at the end of the day. And well, yes, if you look into the distance, yes, it is more colourful towards the direction of the acacia tree. But then, if you look carefully at the end, and you will see this at the end, there is also, again, not many trees, there's also like trees that have been cut down. It doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be a better life on the other side. And while, yes, it is grey on this side, the closest side to the viewer, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a more fun size either, because obviously lack of colour, but then there is also a lot more opportunity because you don't even know what's behind us, we can only really see what's in front of us. And that's really the whole point of the drawing, it's just to show that the two sides aren't better than each other. For the trees, I used a very similar method that I used in my Christmas tree video, but I will make a new tutorial because obviously it's not Christmas anymore, it's literally February, so I'll make sure to do a new tutorial that you can follow. But it's very simple, you just draw different shelves, and yeah, I'll explain it when I make the tutorial. It was definitely important to think about perspective here, because I can't have the trees too far back, otherwise they'll look like they're just as far back as the acacia tree, which is a disadvantage of not doing the floor first. We've got to sort of work on one layer though, so we can't really do the floor first. But either way, it was kind of also hard to sort of lay the trees behind as well, because again, lighting is pretty difficult, but I can somewhat achieve it with some basic lighting skills, which I've also done in the video, which you can also check out too. Now on to the actual drawing. So as you can see, I've rubbed out the path, and the reason why I've rubbed up some of the path is because basically I want a much clearer separation between the grey and the colourful area. And I've already done a very similar drawing which has this very similar format. So I wanted to do something new this time and a little bit different. And then all I do is I just draw in the grass using a very similar method to pretty much my by far most popular video on the channel, the grass tutorial, which you can always still check out and support. It's well over 300. I mean, it's not a lot, but like it's done a lot better than my other videos for some reason. I don't know why people love grass so much, but here we go. So for all you grass fans out there, this is for you. It was definitely important to layer during the grass drawing process, as I can't just have the grass as it is on the tutorial that I already did in the video, because it would be way too light, because this is obviously a sunset, it's not in the daytime. So it was important to go back over it, but also keep the dynamics and the different types of shading still, even when it's darker, because I don't want to get rid of that sort of like realism, I guess. I still want it to be a realistic drawing. And also use a variety of methods going towards the horizon too, by making the grass clumps a lot smaller and eventually just becoming little sort of dots, I guess, to really pinpoint the different strands of grass. And eventually I just swished over it using a sort of like darkish pencil around the same shade as the actual grass itself, and also a blending stump to really blend it towards the horizon and make it nice and smooth. And to really pinpoint the difference between neurotypical, well, the sort of like treatment difference between neurotypical and autistic people, I did also actually add a fence to sort of symbolise that sort of like idea in society. Also, apologies here, I accidentally deleted some parts of the recording of the sky, because I had two separate videos because of frame rate issues, and I accidentally must have deleted one of the ones that had the sky footage, so sadly I can't show that in today's video as I'm displaying on the screen right now, but at least you can see the other bits of footage. I don't want to get rid of the video just because I don't have one bit of footage, and you can still sort of understand what I've done. One of the first biggest problems I noticed is that now that I've done the sky, everything seems very light. Like all the trees sort of blend in with the background, you can't really see them very well. So it was very clear that I had to go over the whole entire trees and like everything. The trees, the grass, the path, everything all over again to make it darker and contrast against the background. Which took a lot of time, definitely. But it was definitely worth it, as the contrast was a lot better and you could definitely see it a lot more, and you will see that once I finish with it. And as it stands, this is pretty much what the sketched version looks like. And the reason why I say that is because I actually made a photocopy of this whole entire A3 canvas I drawn, because this is A3. I took a whole entire photocopy of this, photocopied it twice. And now, the reason why I've done it twice is because if I only did it once, then if I mess up on the actual colouring in stage that we're now entering, then I would have basically been screwed, because I cannot really do it again, and I mean have to work on the original canvas, which will then have the potential to mess up the original. I don't want to mess up the original, I want to still have it in its original form, which is why I made a photocopy, and then now I'm working on the photocopy instead. Now, I did actually pre-draw the sun in using like a pencil on the original copy, so it was very easy to figure out where the sunlight is. And with just the sketch alone, you can't really see where the sun's coming from, so it definitely helped. But I think it helps it too much because it's still kind of visible, but I guess if you squint you can't really see it too well. And with that, the first thing I wanted to do is wanted to make sure that the yellow is closest towards the sun and have the red a lot more sort of like away from the sun. And one of my failed copies made it so that the yellow goes into orange and then goes straight into red, and this doesn't look very good and doesn't really look very accurate at all, and I really didn't like this because real sunsets don't just go straight to red, they're more like an orangey sort of, I'd even say pink colour, so that's the sort of thing I didn't really understand, and I've got to be honest, it doesn't really look anywhere near as good as I wanted to. But thankfully, because I made a photocopy, I can retry this again, and it worked a lot better. But I also wanted to make the difference between the white and the yellow very subtle as well, because this will really create the effect of the sort of sunlight being really bright. So bright in fact that you can't really tell too much of the difference between what's the sky and what's actually the sun, because it's just really bright. The most difficult part was definitely trying to actually blend the colour into the grey background. I didn't want the colour to be all the way across the entire sky. I wanted it to only be colourful towards where the sun is, which would mean it would eventually have to shift from red to grey, and obviously there's not really any images that shift from red to grey because this is very unrealistic. So this was very, very difficult to do, and something I failed on the previous copy that I've done. And added on to the sun being really bright, I wanted to add the sun's rays and bleed them into the grass like I've done here. Now at first this didn't really turn out very well, because the actual colour of the pencils are very sort of like, it's like, I use watercolour pencils as I actually showed you. I didn't use any paints at first, and this didn't really add a lot of contrast. It didn't really look like the sun's rays. However, I did eventually use acrylic paints and sort of use my pencil to sort of like jot it on a little bit, but not too much of it. And this really allowed the actual colour to really be a lot more dynamic and actually blend into the sun a lot more. So it actually feels like the sun's rays are actually going onto the grass. It's really hard to do this with just watercolour pencils alone, which is why I use a bit of acrylic. And finally, the trees were really hard to colour in at first because it was really difficult trying to decide how dark the trees should be. But I did eventually settle on the gold that I originally planned. Again, this sort of shows speciality, but again, what we discussed at the beginning sort of applies here as well. And that is pretty much the image in all of its glory. Thank you so much for watching, and if you did make it to the end of the video, wow, you're amazing. You don't know how much it means to me. I really hope you enjoyed, something different to enjoy for once. I really like this sort of video, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Catch you later!